My name is Stephanie Reynolds, and at 28 years old, I became the unexpected CEO of Reynolds Innovations. Growing up, I watched my father Thomas build this company from nothing but a dream and determination. When he died 2 years ago, my stepbrother Bradley swooped in with his mother Diana, convinced the company was his birthright. They systematically pushed me aside, treating me like an afterthought rather than the founder's daughter. What they never suspected was that before his death my father had made arrangements they could never have anticipated. Today, as I approached the quarterly board meeting, I knew everything was about to change. If you've ever been underestimated because of your age or gender, you'll want to stick around. Let me know where you're watching from, and drop a like if you've ever had to prove yourself to people who thought they knew better. Some of my earliest memories are of visiting my father at the Reynolds Innovations headquarters. I was maybe 5 or 6 years old, proudly wearing a tiny blazer my dad had bought me because I insisted on dressing for business like him. The security guards would wink and call me Little Miss CEO as I skipped through the lobby, my small hand tucked safely in my father's large one. Dad would show me around the offices, introducing me to everyone from the janitors to the executives with the same level of respect. "This is my daughter Stephanie," he'd say with unmistakable pride. "She might be running this place someday." I didn't understand then how prophetic those casual words would become. Unlike other kids who dreaded going to their parents' workplaces I begged to visit, there was something magical about watching my father in his element, seeing how he solved problems and inspired his team. By the time I was 12, I was reading business magazines and asking questions about market strategies that made my father laugh with delight. "You've got business in your blood, Steph," he told me one evening, as we shared ice cream after a particularly successful quarterly meeting. "You understand things instinctively that took me years to learn." When it came time for college, there was never any question about my path. I earned my undergraduate degree in business administration with honors, then went on to get my MBA from Wharton. My summers weren't spent lounging by pools but interning at top firms to gain outside perspective. Dad insisted I learn how other successful companies operated before settling into Reynolds Innovations. "Never mistake nepotism for merit," he would remind me. "When you eventually join the company, I want everyone to know you earned your place." And I did earn it. After graduating, I started in product development, refusing any special treatment. I worked longer hours than anyone else, learned every aspect of the business from manufacturing to marketing, and gradually earned the respect of employees who might have otherwise resented the boss's daughter. Everything changed when I was 16, and my father a widower, since my mother died, when I was just 3, remarried Diana Crawford, a polished business consultant he'd met at a conference. With Diana came her son Bradley, 23 at the time, and fresh out of Harvard Business School. Bradley looked impressive on paper. Harvard-educated, experience at a top consulting firm, articulate and charming when he wanted to be. But there was something missing that I recognized immediately. He didn't have passion for our company. To him, Reynolds Innovations was a prize to be acquired, not a legacy to nurture. At first my father didn't see it. Diana was clever in how she positioned Bradley as the son my father never had, the natural successor to the business. They played happy families, and for a while I tried too for my father's sake, but behind the smiles Bradley made his ambitions clear. "No offense, Stephanie," he told me once when we were alone, "but this company needs serious leadership, not sentimental family management. Your father built something impressive, but taking it to the next level requires a different skill set." I reported this conversation to my father, who brushed it off as competitive spirit. "A little healthy ambition never hurt anyone," he said, but I could see a flicker of concern in his eyes. As the years passed, that flicker grew. My father began to see through Diana's carefully constructed facade and Bradley's performative dedication. By the time my father was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer 5 years ago, he had developed serious doubts about his stepson's character and intentions. During the last year of his life, as the cancer ravaged his once robust frame, my father called me into private meetings that Bradley and Diana knew nothing about. Sometimes these meetings included Eleanor Pierce, his trusted lawyer, and friend of 30 years. Stephanie, my father said, during one of these meetings, his voice weaker than I'd ever heard it, but his eyes sharp and clear. I've been watching both you and Bradley carefully. You've proven yourself in every department you've worked in. The employees respect you. You understand our core values. He paused to catch his breath, and Eleanor handed him water. Bradley talks a good game, but he doesn't love this company. To him, it's just an asset, a stepping stone. Diana has been pushing for me to name him as successor, but I've seen how he operates when he thinks I'm not watching. My father then revealed that he had secretly arranged to transfer 75% of company shares to me, keeping the transaction confidential until I decided the time was right to reveal it. The board thinks the shares are still in my personal holding company, which will be directed by trustees after my death, he explained. Only Eleanor knows the full truth. This gives you time to establish yourself without Bradley and Diana forcing you out immediately. But why not just announce me as your successor now? I asked. My father's smile was tired but sly. Because sometimes, Stephanie, the most powerful position is the one no one knows you hold. Bradley will show his true colors if he believes he has free rein. The board will see what he really is. And when the time comes, you'll be ready. 3 months later, my father passed away peacefully in his sleep. At the funeral, I was still numb with grief when I noticed Bradley and Diana huddled with board members, already discussing company transitions. They barely waited until the reception after the service to begin establishing their authority, with Bradley introducing himself to key clients as the new head of Reynolds Innovations. I watched in disbelief, my father's coffin barely in the ground, as they laid the groundwork to take everything he had built, but beneath my tears was a steely determination. My father had trusted me with his legacy, and I wouldn't let him down. The Monday after my bereavement leave ended, I returned to headquarters with a mixture of grief and resolve. My father's office had already been cleared out, Bradley's name on the door, his personal items arranged as if he'd always belonged there. I paused in the hallway, took a deep breath, and headed to my own office. Except it wasn't my office anymore. "Oh, Stephanie," Margaret, the executive floor secretary, said with evident discomfort. "Your things have been moved to the office down the hall." Bradley thought it would be better for the new marketing director to be closer to the main conference room. The office down the hall turned out to be less than half the size of my previous space, tucked away in a corner far from the executive suite. My degrees and awards had been haphazardly stacked on the desk rather than hung on the walls. The message couldn't have been clearer: I was being sidelined. This was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, I noticed my name disappeared from key email threads. Meetings were scheduled during my lunch hour, or occasionally not scheduled at all. "Sorry, must have been an oversight," Bradley would say with a smile that never reached his eyes when I confronted him about being excluded from a vendor negotiation I'd initiated. In the meetings I did attend, Bradley developed a particular talent for undermining me. He would cut me off mid-sentence, rephrase my ideas as if they were his own, or worst of all, give me that indulgent smile before saying, "That's an interesting perspective, Stephanie, but perhaps a bit naive from a business standpoint." Diana, meanwhile, worked the political angle. She hosted dinner parties for board members, organized golf outings with key executives, and generally charmed her way into the company's power structure. She was particularly skillful at spreading subtle doubts about my capabilities. "Stephanie has such creative ideas," she would say, the compliment thinly veiling the implication that I wasn't serious or strategic enough. "She's so much like her mother, very artistic and emotional." The projects I'd been leading were gradually reassigned. The product line I'd developed was put on hold, pending review. My team members were redistributed to other departments. After 2 months of this treatment, I finally confronted Bradley directly in his office, closing the door behind me. "What exactly are you trying to do here?" I demanded, keeping my voice steady despite my anger. "You've moved me to a closet of an office, excluded me from meetings, and now you're dismantling my team." Bradley leaned back in my father's chair, his expression a mixture of condescension and false concern. Stephanie, I understand this is a difficult time for you. Grief can cloud judgment, make us emotional. I'm simply making necessary business decisions during this transition period. Perhaps you should consider taking more time off. No one would blame you for needing space after your father's passing. This isn't about grief, I replied, fighting to keep my composure. This is about you systematically pushing me out of the company my father built. I think you're being paranoid, he said, his tone hardening slightly. The board has confidence in my leadership. Your father may have indulged your involvement because you're his daughter, but Reynolds Innovations needs experienced direction now. I'm offering you a place here out of respect for your father, but if you can't be a team player. He left the threat hanging in the air between us. That evening, I met my best friend Rachel for dinner, finally letting my carefully maintained facade crack as I explained what was happening. They're gaslighting you, Rachel said bluntly, her lawyer's mind cutting straight to the heart of the issue. Bradley is isolating you professionally, while Diana undermines your credibility socially. Classic power play. I know, I said, pushing my barely touched pasta around my plate. But I can't prove anything. Every individual action has a plausible explanation. Rachel leaned forward. So what are you going to do about your shares? You own the company, Stephanie. You could walk into Bradley's office tomorrow and end this. I shook my head. My father wanted me to wait to let Bradley show his true colors to everyone. He believed the timing would matter. Your father couldn't have anticipated how quickly they'd move against you, Rachel argued. Maybe not, I admitted. But I trust his judgment. If I reveal my ownership now, Bradley and Diana will paint me as the emotional daughter making a desperate power grab. I need evidence of Bradley's mismanagement first, something concrete that the board can't ignore. After that conversation, I adopted a new strategy. Outwardly, I appeared to accept my diminished role, no longer openly challenging Bradley in meetings. This seemed to satisfy him. His ego, interpreting my silence as submission. Meanwhile, I began gathering information. I discovered that Bradley was planning to sell off our research and development division, the innovative heart of the company that my father had nurtured for decades. He described it in a confidential memo to the board as streamlining operations to focus on core profit centers, but in reality, it was a quick way to boost short-term profits at the expense of long-term innovation. I cultivated allies among the employees who remained loyal to my father's vision. Jessica from accounting quietly passed me financial reports. Michael in operations kept me informed about factory changes. And most valuable of all, Catherine, our CFO, who had been with the company for 20 years, began expressing private concerns about Bradley's leadership. He doesn't understand the cyclical nature of our business, Catherine told me during a clandestine lunch off-site. He's implementing aggressive cost-cutting that looks good on quarterly reports, but will damage us within a year. After hours, when most employees had gone home, I would return to my small office and work late into the night, reviewing company financials, analyzing market trends, and developing an alternative strategy to the one Bradley was pursuing. If I was going to challenge him, I needed to have a better vision to offer. The company my father had built was worth fighting for. I wouldn't let Bradley and Diana dismantle it piece by piece for their own gain. 6 months after my father's death, the impact of Bradley's leadership was becoming evident throughout Reynolds Innovations. Our stock price had dropped 15%, customer complaints had increased, and employee turnover reached unprecedented levels. The vibrant, innovative company culture my father had cultivated was deteriorating into a tense, fearful environment. Bradley implemented sweeping cost-cutting measures, with little regard for their long-term consequences. The company gym was closed, the education reimbursement program suspended, and the annual employee appreciation event canceled. While he justified these decisions as necessary belt-tightening during the transition, he simultaneously approved extensive renovations to the executive floor and purchased a new corporate jet. During a tense management meeting where Bradley announced another round of staff reductions, I finally broke my silence. These employees aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. I argued, feeling the eyes of every executive at the table. Many of them have been with Reynolds for decades. They have institutional knowledge we can't replace. And the severance packages you're proposing are insultingly inadequate. Bradley's jaw tightened. We're running a business, not a charity, Stephanie. Difficult decisions are necessary to ensure profitability. My father always said that our employees are our greatest asset, I countered. He believed treating people well wasn't just morally right, but good business. Our low turnover and high innovation rate proved he was correct. Your father's sentimentality is precisely what left certain areas of the business inefficient, Bradley replied coldly. Times change. Methods change. Diana, who had no official role but nevertheless attended key meetings as Bradley's advisor, chimed in with false sweetness. Stephanie dear, perhaps these operational details are a bit beyond your experience. Your father protected you from the harsher realities of business management. The condescension in her tone made several executives shift uncomfortably in their seats. Catherine, the CFO, cleared her throat. Actually, I've reviewed the numbers and I share some of Stephanie's concerns. The proposed cuts will save approximately $2 million this quarter. But the projected loss of productivity and institutional knowledge could cost us 5 times that amount over the next year. Bradley shot Catherine a look that could freeze lava, then quickly forced a smile. I appreciate your input, but the decision has been made. Moving on to the next agenda item. That afternoon, Bradley's retaliation arrived swiftly. An email informed me that I was being removed from all current project teams to focus on special assignments that never materialized. My assistant was reassigned, and my system access was restricted to basic functions. Meanwhile, Diana escalated her whisper campaign about my emotional state. I overheard her in the break room, telling 2 board members that the family was concerned about Stephanie's difficulty accepting change, and that I had been in therapy since Thomas's death. Neither statement was true, but the damage was done. The sympathetic glances from colleagues made my blood boil. A month later, through Jessica's diligent information gathering, I discovered something truly alarming. Bradley had been secretly meeting with executives from Westfield Corporation, our largest competitor, to discuss selling Reynolds Innovations. The email threads suggested these talks had begun barely 2 months after my father's funeral. That same week, I had an unexpected confrontation with Diana in the parking garage. She was leaving a strategy meeting I hadn't been invited to, and we reached our cars at the same time. Stephanie, she said with artificial warmth, I rarely see you these days. How are you holding up? Cut the act, Diana, I replied quietly. I know what you and Bradley are doing to this company. My father would be devastated. Her smile vanished, replaced by a cold stare. Your father made his choice when he married me, but he never truly accepted Bradley, always comparing him to you, his precious daughter. Do you know how that felt for my son? This isn't about family feelings, I said. It's about respecting what my father built and the people who helped him build it. Diana laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the concrete structure. You're so naive. This was never about building something lasting. It's about extracting maximum value. Why do you think I married your father? The casual cruelty of her admission stunned me momentarily. She continued, her voice low and venomous. Bradley and I have worked too hard to let you interfere. You're not family, Stephanie. You never were. You're just an obstacle we need to remove. She got into her luxury car and drove away, leaving me shaking with rage, and I admit a touch of fear. The mask had finally dropped completely. The following week, Bradley called an all-hands meeting to announce a major restructuring. The corporate speak couldn't disguise the reality departments were being consolidated. Reporting structures changed, and my position as Director of Strategic Initiatives was being eliminated entirely. As we streamline operations, Bradley explained to hundreds of worried employees, some redundancies inevitably emerge. These changes, while difficult, position Reynolds Innovations for a stronger future. I stood at the back of the room watching faces fall as people realized their jobs were at risk. Bradley never once made eye contact with me during his presentation. That evening, I met with Eleanor Pierce, my father's lawyer, at her office downtown. The elegant older woman listened intently as I detailed everything that had happened. "It's time to reveal my ownership," I concluded. "Bradley is dismantling everything my father built. He's negotiating to sell the company. I can't wait any longer." Eleanor tapped her pen thoughtfully against her legal pad. "I understand your urgency, Stephanie, but we need to be strategic. Bradley has spent months building his narrative and relationships with the board. If you suddenly announce your majority ownership, he'll claim you've been secretly plotting a hostile takeover." "But I have been plotting," I said with frustration. "That was literally my father's plan." "Yes, but your father wanted you to wait until Bradley had clearly demonstrated his unfitness to lead. Do you have concrete evidence of mismanagement or breaches of fiduciary duty, something beyond policy disagreements?" I hesitated. "I have concerns, strong ones, but nothing that would qualify as illegal or grossly negligent." "Then I suggest you gather more evidence before making your move," Eleanor advised. "Your father set this up carefully. The trust holding the shares has specific provisions. Timing matters." While I respected Eleanor's counsel, my investigation took on new urgency. Working with Catherine, I discovered Bradley had been using company funds for personal expenses, disguising them as business costs. He had also been inflating his performance metrics in reports to the board, taking credit for initiatives started under my father's leadership, while blaming recent failures on legacy issues. As the weeks passed, my anxiety and isolation grew. Late one night, alone in my apartment, surrounded by financial documents and legal papers, I broke down crying. Was I letting my father down by not acting sooner? Was I being overly cautious while Bradley destroyed everything? I called Rachel, who came over immediately with ice cream and clear-headed perspective. "Your father trusted you with this responsibility because he believed in your judgment," she reminded me, as we sat on my couch. "Not Bradley's, not Diana's, not even Eleanor's, yours. What does your gut tell you?" Before I could answer, my phone rang. It was Daniel, a veteran manager in operations who had always been loyal to my father. "Stephanie, I thought you should know," he said without preamble. "Bradley's planning to fire 8 people from the original product team tomorrow. The same team that developed the patented technology that put Reynolds on the map." The final piece clicked into place. Bradley wasn't just cutting costs or changing direction. He was systematically removing the people most loyal to my father's vision, the ones who might question his decisions or stand with me. "Thank you, Daniel," I said, a calm certainty, replacing my earlier doubt. "I appreciate the warning." After hanging up, I turned to Rachel. "I know what I need to do now." The next morning, a company-wide email from Bradley landed in my inbox, announcing a special board meeting scheduled for Friday at 2 p.m. The agenda listed a single item: strategic future of Reynolds Innovations discussion and vote. My heart raced as I read between the lines. This wasn't a routine meeting. This was Bradley's endgame, the culmination of his months of maneuvering. He was bringing his plan to sell the company to a vote. I immediately called Jessica, who worked in the executive administration department. "Do you know anything about this board meeting?" I asked without preamble. "Bradley's been on the phone all morning with board members," she confirmed in a hushed voice. "He's flying in Martin and Donovan specially. Whatever this is, it's big." Martin and Donovan were our 2 most distant board members, based in Chicago and Austin, respectively. For Bradley to arrange their in-person attendance on short notice suggested he needed their votes and didn't trust a video conference for something this important. Next, I called Eleanor. "They're moving faster than we anticipated," she said after I explained the situation. "Bradley must have sensed opposition growing. He's trying to force a quick vote before questions can be raised." "What exactly could they be voting on that requires such urgency?" I asked, though I feared I already knew. "Most likely approval to enter final negotiations with a buyer," Eleanor replied. "Based on what you've told me about his meetings with Westfield, he probably has a tentative offer that expires soon. He needs board authorization to proceed." Can they really sell the company without my approval, as the majority shareholder? No, but remember, the board doesn't know you're the majority shareholder. They believe the shares are still held in your father's trust, which Bradley has likely misrepresented as supporting his plans. I made a decision then. The board meeting on Friday. That's when I'll reveal my ownership. Are you sure? Eleanor asked. Once this is done, there's no going back. Bradley and Diana will become open enemies. They already are, I said grimly. At least after Friday, they'll be enemies without power over my father's company. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of preparation. I met secretly with Alexander Chen, CEO of Nova Technologies, who had approached me months earlier about a potential partnership rather than acquisition. Unlike Westfield, which would likely dismantle Reynolds for its patents and client list, Alexander saw value in keeping our company intact and creating synergies between our firms. Catherine helped me develop detailed financial projections showing how such a partnership could increase Reynolds' value by 30% within 2 years, preserving jobs and our company identity while expanding into new markets. On Thursday night, I tried to access the company server remotely to upload my presentation for the board meeting, only to find my credentials had been revoked. A call to IT confirmed my worst fears. "I'm sorry, Miss Reynolds," said Trevor, the night support technician. "I received direct instructions from Mr. Crawford to restrict your access. He said it was a security protocol." Bradley was cutting off my digital access to the company. I could only imagine what else he had planned. I barely slept that night, rehearsing what I would say to the board, anticipating Bradley's counter-arguments, and planning for every contingency. By morning, I felt simultaneously exhausted and wired with adrenaline. As I dressed for the confrontation in my most confident outfit, a tailored navy suit my father had given me, for my first executive presentation, my phone rang. It was the security desk at headquarters. "Miss Reynolds, I'm afraid there's a problem with your access badge," said Frank, the head of security who had known me since childhood. His voice carried an unmistakable note of discomfort. "The system shows it's been deactivated." "By whose authorization?" I asked, though again I knew the answer. "Mr. Crawford, ma'am. Late yesterday. I'm really sorry about this." "It's not your fault, Frank," I assured him, mind racing, to formulate a new plan. "Thank you for letting me know." I immediately called Eleanor, who was already on her way to the office with the legal documentation of my ownership. "They've deactivated my badge," I told her. "Bradley's trying to physically keep me out of the meeting." "I suspected he might try something like this," Eleanor replied calmly. "Don't worry. As the company's long-standing legal counsel, my access is still active. Meet me at the side entrance at 1:30, 15 minutes before the meeting starts." At 1:15, I received a text from Jessica board members arriving. Bradley looking smug. Meeting in main conference room. I arrived at headquarters at 1:25, heart pounding, as I approached the imposing glass building that had once felt like a second home. Eleanor wasn't at our meeting spot yet, and I paced anxiously, checking my watch every 30 seconds. At 1:35, with no sign of Eleanor, and the meeting starting in 10 minutes, I made a decision. I couldn't wait any longer. I walked to the main entrance and approached the security desk. "Frank, I know my badge isn't working, but you know who I am. I need to attend the board meeting." Frank looked genuinely pained. "Miss Reynolds, I have direct orders not to let you in without Mr. Crawford's approval." He was very specific. "Frank, this is my father's company," I said, trying to keep the desperation from my voice. "I know, and if it were up to me." He trailed off, then straightened as someone approached from behind me. "Mr. Crawford, I was just explaining to Miss Reynolds about the access situation." I turned to find Bradley standing there, his expression a mixture of triumph and disdain. "Stephanie." "What a surprise," he said, not sounding surprised at all. "I'm afraid there's an important board meeting about to start. We're discussing sensitive matters about the company's future." "A future I should have a say in," I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. The board will make the appropriate decisions, Bradley said dismissively. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to get back. We're expecting some final financial projections for the Westfield offer. As he turned to leave, I followed him toward the elevators. Bradley's face darkened as he realized I wasn't backing down. Stephanie, don't make a scene, he hissed. Security will remove you if necessary, and that would be embarrassing for everyone. We rode the elevator in tense silence to the executive floor. As we approached the boardroom, I could see through the glass walls that most members were already seated. Diana stood near the head of the table, arranging presentation materials. Bradley stopped at the door, physically blocking my path. His voice carried the sneer that had become all too familiar over the past months. Sorry, this is for shareholders only, he said loud enough for those inside to hear. In that moment, everything became crystal clear. This was exactly the scenario my father had prepared me for. Not just the legal ownership, but the psychological moment when Bradley would reveal his true character for all to see. I smiled and pulled out my phone, opening the secure file Eleanor had sent me weeks ago, the legal documentation of my 75% ownership. Perfect timing to announce I own 75% of the shares, I replied, my voice steady and clear. The shock on Bradley's face was worth every moment of suffering I'd endured. His mouth opened and closed wordlessly as the color drained from his face. Inside, the boardroom conversation stopped as heads turned toward us. Diana's expression shifted from confusion to alarm as she hurried toward the door. What nonsense is this? She demanded, looking between Bradley and me. Not nonsense, came Eleanor's voice from behind us as she finally arrived, slightly breathless, carrying her leather briefcase. Legal fact. I have all the documentation right here, certified and notarized. Thomas Reynolds transferred 75% of company shares to Stephanie over a year before his death. I stepped around the still stunned Bradley and walked confidently into the boardroom. Gentlemen, ladies, I believe we have an important meeting scheduled. As the majority shareholder of Reynolds Innovations, I insist on participating. The boardroom erupted into chaos. Board members half rose from their seats, expressions ranging from shock to confusion to calculated interest. Diana's face contorted with fury as she snatched the documents from Eleanor's hands, flipping through them frantically as if searching for some fatal flaw. This can't be legal, she sputtered. Thomas would never have done this without consulting me. These must be forgeries. Eleanor, the picture of professional calm, set her briefcase on the table and extracted additional copies of the transfer documents. I assure you, Mrs. Reynolds, these documents are entirely legitimate. I personally handled the transfer at Thomas's explicit request. The transaction was properly recorded, though kept confidential, as per his instructions. Bradley, having recovered his voice, if not his composure, stormed into the room. This is a desperate power grab, he declared, looking around at the board members. Stephanie has been increasingly unstable since my stepfather's death. Now she's fabricated this ridiculous claim rather than accept the company's new direction. Jonathan Weber, the longest-serving board member and a friend of my father's for 30 years, reached for one of the document copies. He studied it carefully, his experienced eyes taking in every detail. These appear genuine, he said, finally looking up at me. Eleanor's signature and notary stamp, proper transfer documentation. The dates correspond to when Thomas was first diagnosed. Of course they look genuine, Bradley snapped. That doesn't mean they're valid. My stepfather was ill, heavily medicated. If these documents even exist, they were signed under duress or diminished capacity. I met Bradley's gaze steadily. My father was of completely sound mind when he made this decision. He specifically wanted his intentions kept private until the right moment, which is now, just as you're attempting to sell his life's work to our biggest competitor. Several board members exchanged glances at this direct reference to the Westfield deal, which apparently hadn't been fully disclosed to everyone. That's absurd, Bradley blustered. We're exploring strategic partnerships, not selling the company. Catherine, who had been silently observing from her seat, finally spoke up. Actually, the proposed Westfield deal is explicitly an acquisition, not a partnership. The draft terms would dissolve Reynolds Innovations as an independent entity within 12 months. Diana turned on Catherine with undisguised venom. You had no authorization to discuss those terms outside of preliminary financial assessment. As CFO, I have a fiduciary duty to the company and its shareholders, Catherine replied coolly. All of its shareholders. Eleanor had finished distributing copies of the ownership documents to each board member. If I may direct your attention to Section 3, Paragraph 2, she said, you'll note that Thomas Reynolds transferred these shares with all voting rights to Stephanie effective immediately upon transfer, not upon his death. Legally speaking, Stephanie has been the controlling shareholder of Reynolds Innovations for over 3 years. Bradley slammed his hand on the table. This is preposterous. If that were true, why wait until now to reveal it? This is clearly a fabrication, created to block necessary changes to a company that's been mismanaged for years. I stepped forward, my voice steady. I've prepared a presentation addressing exactly why this moment was chosen, along with a comprehensive analysis of the company's current position and my proposed path forward. I handed a USB drive to Sandra, the board secretary. May I have 15 minutes of the board's time? Jonathan Weber nodded. I think under the circumstances that's more than reasonable. Despite Bradley's continued objections, the presentation was loaded onto the room's display system. For the next 15 minutes, I walked the board through a detailed assessment of Reynolds Innovations' current challenges, many stemming directly from Bradley's leadership decisions. I presented evidence of the declining stock price, increased employee turnover, and customer dissatisfaction. I showed the board internal emails revealing Bradley had misrepresented my father's long-term strategy and had taken credit for successful initiatives while blaming inherited problems for his own failures. Most damning of all, with Catherine's assistance, I highlighted several instances where Bradley had misused company funds, including charging personal travel as business expenses and hiring consultants with connections to Diana at inflated rates. These aren't mere differences in management philosophy, I concluded. This is a pattern of decisions that prioritize short-term gains and personal benefit over the company's long-term health and my father's vision. I then presented my alternative to the Westfield acquisition, a strategic partnership with Nova Technologies that would preserve Reynolds' independence while creating new growth opportunities. Alexander Chen and his team see value in what makes Reynolds unique, I explained. Unlike Westfield, which wants to absorb our patents and client base before discarding the rest, Nova proposes a genuine collaboration that would increase our market share and protect the jobs of employees who have dedicated their careers to this company. Throughout my presentation, Bradley attempted to interject with denials and counter-accusations, but Jonathan repeatedly called him to order, insisting I be allowed to finish. Diana had fallen ominously silent, her eyes calculating as she whispered occasionally to Gerald Foster, a board member she had cultivated as an ally. When I finished, Bradley immediately launched into a blistering rebuttal, dismissing my evidence as cherry-picked data points and naive business analysis. He characterized my partnership proposal as sentimental attachment to a failing company model and insisted the Westfield acquisition represented the only viable path forward. Stephanie is her father's daughter, in all the wrong ways, he concluded scathingly, prioritizing emotional attachments over sound business judgment. The company has been stagnating for years, under outdated leadership principles. The market demands bold action, not nostalgic preservation. Catherine requested permission to address the board, which Jonathan granted over Bradley's objections. As CFO, I feel obligated to correct several misrepresentations in Mr. Crawford's statements, she said formally. First, Reynolds Innovations was showing consistent growth and healthy profit margins until approximately 6 months ago, corresponding precisely with the leadership change following Thomas Reynolds' death. She proceeded to systematically dismantle Bradley's financial claims, providing accurate figures that contradicted his inflated projections for the Westfield deal. She confirmed my allegations about misused funds, citing specific examples that made several board members shift uncomfortably in their seats. In my professional opinion, Catherine concluded the current management approach represents a significant risk to the company's long-term sustainability. The financial data simply doesn't support Mr. Crawford's assertions. Diana, sensing the room's shifting sentiment, attempted a new strategy. "This has clearly become an emotional family matter," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Perhaps we should adjourn to allow cooler heads to prevail before making any hasty decisions." Jonathan Weber shook his head. "I believe we have sufficient information to proceed. Given the ownership documentation presented and the serious concerns raised about current management, I move for an immediate vote of confidence in Bradley Crawford's leadership." Diana's face paled. "That's not on the agenda. We're here to discuss the Westfield proposal." As acting chair of this meeting, Jonathan replied firmly, "I'm exercising my authority to amend the agenda in light of significant new information affecting company governance." The vote was quick and decisive, 8-2 against Bradley, with only Gerald Foster and Diana's cousin Richard voting in his favor. With the board's vote recorded, Jonathan announced, "I believe we should recognize Stephanie Reynolds' position as majority shareholder and her right to appoint company leadership." He turned to me. "Miss Reynolds, what do you propose?" Standing tall at the head of the table my father had once occupied, I felt a profound sense of rightness, as if he were standing beside me nodding in approval. "As majority shareholder, I hereby remove Bradley Crawford from all positions within Reynolds Innovations effective immediately. I will temporarily assume the role of CEO while the board conducts a proper search for permanent leadership." I paused, then added, "Though I will be submitting my own candidacy for that position." Bradley's face contorted with rage. "You can't do this. I've spent years preparing to lead this company." "Actually, she can," Eleanor stated calmly. "And she just did." "Security will escort you to clear out your personal items." I continued, meeting Bradley's furious glare without flinching. "Diana, as you hold no official position with the company, your access will also be terminated today." Diana stood gathering her designer handbag with trembling hands. "You'll regret this, Stephanie. The Reynolds name won't protect you from what's coming." "That sounds remarkably like a threat, Mrs. Reynolds," Jonathan observed mildly. "Perhaps not the wisest approach given the circumstances." As security arrived to escort Bradley and Diana from the boardroom, I turned back to the remaining board members. "I know this has been shocking, and you have every right to questions and concerns. I'm prepared to address them all, but first I'd like to introduce Alexander Chen, CEO of Nova Technologies, who can outline our potential partnership in more detail." Alexander, who had been waiting in a nearby conference room at my request, entered with perfect timing. His presentation on the partnership possibilities captivated the board, offering a vision of growth that preserved my father's legacy while embracing necessary innovation. As the tumultuous meeting finally concluded 3 hours later, Jonathan approached me privately. "Your father would be incredibly proud," he said, his eyes misty. "He told me once that you had the heart and the head to lead, but he worried you might not have the steel. I think today answers that question definitively." I felt tears threatening, but held them back. "I learned from the best," I replied simply. Walking out of the building that evening, as the acknowledged leader of Reynolds Innovations, I finally allowed myself a moment of pure triumph. The company my father built was back in the right hands. Now the real work of restoration could begin. My first week as the acknowledged CEO of Reynolds Innovations was a baptism by fire. The news of Bradley's dramatic removal spread through the company like wildfire, generating a mixture of shock, relief, and uncertainty. Employees gathered in small clusters throughout the building, their conversations dropping to whispers whenever I passed. I knew addressing this uncertainty had to be my first priority. On Wednesday morning, I called an all-company meeting in the large atrium of our headquarters. Standing on the temporary stage, looking out at hundreds of faces, some familiar, others new, I felt the weight of my father's legacy and my own responsibility. For those who don't know me well, I'm Stephanie Reynolds. I began my voice steady despite my racing heart. Many of you worked with my father for years, some for decades. Others joined more recently, and may only know the company under different leadership. Today marks a new chapter for Reynolds Innovations, but one firmly rooted in the principles that made this company great from the beginning. I outlined my vision, emphasizing continuity with my father's values, while acknowledging the need for strategic evolution. I announced the immediate reversal of several of Bradley's most damaging policies. The R&D division would remain intact. The education reimbursement program would be reinstated, and there would be no further layoffs without comprehensive review. Change is inevitable in business, I concluded. But how we manage that change matters. At Reynolds, we will face challenges together with transparency and mutual respect. My door is open to each of you, just as my father's was. The response was cautiously positive. Many long-term employees approached me afterward with visible relief, while newer hires seemed curious rather than resistant. Catherine later told me she overheard one engineer say, "She talks like her father, but with her own style. Maybe this won't be a disaster after all." I considered that faint praise a solid starting point. With the immediate internal communication addressed, my next priority was implementing strategic changes. I restored funding to our R&D department, putting Daniel in charge of revitalizing the innovation pipeline. I established employee retention programs specifically designed to keep our most knowledgeable team members from being poached by competitors who had circled during Bradley's tenure. The confrontation with Bradley and Diana about their remaining involvement came sooner than expected. 3 days after the board meeting, their lawyer requested a settlement discussion at Eleanor's office. Bradley arrived with his trademark arrogance, seemingly intact, though the dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. "Let's cut to the chase," he said, before pleasantries could even be exchanged. "I still own 12% of Reynolds Innovations. Diana owns another 8%. We want to sell our shares at a premium and sever all ties." "Why would I pay a premium for minority shares?" I asked calmly. "Because otherwise we'll be very uncomfortable board members," Diana replied with a thin smile. "Every decision questioned, every strategy opposed. Do you really want that distraction while trying to prove yourself as CEO?" Eleanor and I had anticipated this approach and prepared accordingly. "Actually," I responded, "I've reviewed the shareholder agreement my father put in place. Section 17 specifically addresses board qualification requirements, including a good faith clause that would be difficult for you to meet given recent events." Bradley's face reddened. "You can't keep us off the board. That's shareholder oppression." "Not according to Delaware corporate law," Eleanor interjected smoothly. "The courts give wide latitude to properly established qualification requirements." Thomas was quite thorough in his legal protections. After 3 hours of tense negotiation, we reached an agreement. Reynolds Innovations would purchase their shares at fair market value, not the premium they demanded. Bradley would receive a modest severance package in exchange for a non-disparagement agreement and non-compete clause. Diana, having no official position, received nothing beyond payment for her shares. As they prepared to leave, Bradley paused at the door. For a moment, something almost vulnerable flickered across his face. "He never gave me a chance, you know," he said quietly. "Your father, he decided I wasn't worthy before he even knew me." I considered this, then shook my head. "That's not true, Bradley. My father gave everyone a chance to prove themselves. You just proved the wrong things." With Bradley and Diana removed from the equation, I could focus fully on rebuilding the executive team. Catherine remained as CFO, her loyalty during the difficult months, rewarded with an expanded role and equity compensation. Jessica, who had risked her job to keep me informed, was promoted to Chief of Staff, while Michael took over operations with a mandate to restore quality standards that had slipped under Bradley's cost-cutting. The partnership with Alexander's company, Nova Technologies, proceeded more smoothly than I could have hoped. Our complementary product lines and shared values created natural synergies, and the deal increased Reynolds' valuation by 27% within the first quarter, exceeding even our optimistic projections. Media coverage of the leadership change was initially skeptical, with business publications questioning whether I had the experience to lead a company of Reynolds' size. The Wall Street Journal ran a particularly condescending piece titled "Daddy's Girl Takes the Helm," which made my blood boil despite Eleanor's advice to ignore it. I channeled that frustration into proving them wrong. Under my leadership, we launched 2 successful product lines, expanded into 3 new markets, and increased profit margins by implementing smarter efficiency measures that didn't sacrifice quality or employee well-being. By the 6-month mark, the narrative had shifted. The same publication that had dismissed me ran a follow-up feature, Reynolds Renaissance, how Stephanie Reynolds revitalized her father's legacy. The stock price had recovered to pre-Bradley levels and was climbing steadily. More meaningful than the media validation was the transformation I witnessed within the company. The fear and uncertainty that had permeated the hallways during Bradley's tenure gradually gave way to renewed energy and innovation. Employees who had been silenced began speaking up in meetings again, offering the creative ideas that had always been Reynolds' competitive advantage. Not everything was smooth sailing. I made mistakes sometimes, significant ones. An attempt to revamp our distribution system created unexpected bottlenecks that took weeks to resolve. A new marketing campaign fell flat, with consumers requiring a costly pivot. But unlike Bradley, I owned these errors, transparently worked alongside teams to fix them, and learned from each misstep. Balancing the demands of leadership with my personal grief proved challenging. There were nights I returned to my father's office, now mine, and felt his absence acutely. I found myself turning to ask his advice, only to remember he wasn't there. During one particularly difficult week, I broke down crying alone after hours, wondering if I was truly honoring his vision or merely imposing my own. Rachel Ever, my steadfast friend, reminded me of something important during one of our rare opportunities for dinner together. "Your father didn't want you to be his clone, Stephanie," she said wisely. "He wanted you to lead with your own strengths. The company shouldn't be a museum to Thomas Reynolds. It should be a living entity that evolves while keeping its soul intact." Those words helped me find the balance between respecting my father's legacy and establishing my own leadership identity. I maintained his core values, his commitment to employees and innovation, but implemented them in ways that reflected my generation and personal style. As the 1-year anniversary of taking control approached, I walked through the company headquarters with a sense of pride mixed with humility. Reynolds Innovations wasn't perfect, but it was healthy again, growing and evolving as my father would have wanted. The culture he had nurtured for decades was flourishing once more, with my own contributions woven into its fabric. What had begun as a defensive action to prevent Bradley from destroying my father's legacy had transformed into something more positive and forward-looking, my own vision for the company's future, built on the foundation my father had established, but not constrained by it. The company was no longer just his, nor was it just mine. It belonged to everyone who built it day by day with their creativity, dedication, and hard work. Understanding that truth was perhaps the most valuable lesson of all. Today marks 1 year since I walked into that boardroom and reclaimed my father's company. 1 year since I watched the shock spread across Bradley's face as he realized his carefully constructed house of cards was collapsing. 1 year of rebuilding, restructuring, and reimagining what Reynolds Innovations could be. The company my father founded is thriving again. Our stock price has increased 63% from its lowest point under Bradley's leadership. Employee retention has stabilized, with turnover rates returning to the historically low levels my father maintained. Most importantly, the culture of innovation and mutual respect that defined Reynolds Innovations for decades has been restored and strengthened. Personally, this journey has transformed me in ways I never anticipated. The timid, conflict-averse young woman who once avoided confrontation at all costs, has been replaced by someone stronger, more decisive, and infinitely more confident. I've learned to trust my instincts while remaining open to guidance from those with experience and wisdom to share. My relationship with the extended Reynolds family remains complicated. Several cousins who had distanced themselves during Bradley and Diana's reign have cautiously reconnected, though our interactions remain somewhat guarded. Bradley and Diana themselves relocated to the West Coast shortly after our settlement, where I hear Bradley has found a position with a venture capital firm. We have no contact, which is probably best for everyone involved. Last Sunday, I visited my father's grave for the first time in months. The polished granite headstone stood dignified among the ancient oaks of the cemetery, much like my father had stood tall, amid the chaos of business and family dynamics. I brought his favorite flowers, lilies, and spent an hour sitting beside his resting place, telling him everything that had happened as if he could hear me. The partnership with Nova Technologies has exceeded even our optimistic projections, I said, tracing his engraved name with my fingertips. Alexander has become a valued advisor and friend. You would like him, Dad. He has your integrity and vision. As I was preparing to leave, my phone rang. It was Eleanor, her timing uncanny as always. Stephanie, I found something while cleaning out some old files that I think you should see, she said. It's a letter from your father addressed to you. He asked me to give it to you 1 year after you took control of the company, not before. My heart raced as I drove directly to Eleanor's office. The elegant older woman handed me a sealed envelope, my name, written in my father's distinctive handwriting across the front. He wrote this about 2 weeks before he passed, she explained gently. Said you'd need it more at the 1-year mark than immediately after taking over. Alone in my car, I carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. My dearest Stephanie, it began in my father's bold script. If you're reading this, then several things have happened. I've been gone for over a year. You've taken your rightful place at Reynolds Innovations, and knowing you, you've already begun to make it your own. Tears blurred my vision as I continued reading his words of confidence and wisdom. He wrote about watching me grow from a curious child into a capable woman, about his pride in my accomplishments, and his absolute faith in my ability to lead. I arranged your inheritance the way I did, not just to protect the company from Bradley's short-sightedness, he wrote, but to give you one final lesson in leadership. By waiting, by observing, by choosing the precise moment to act, you demonstrated the patience and strategic thinking that no business school can teach. That was the test, Stephanie, and I never doubted you would pass it. His letter concluded with personal reflections and advice that I'll keep private, but his final lines are worth sharing. Remember always that a company is not buildings or products or even profits. It's people united by purpose. Lead them with integrity, challenge them with high expectations, and support them when they stumble. That's the Reynolds way. That's your way now. I couldn't be prouder of the leader and woman you've become. All my love always, Dad. The letter gave me a sense of closure I hadn't realized I still needed. My father had trusted me not just with his company, but with his legacy, confident that I would honor it while making it my own. This year has taught me invaluable lessons about business leadership and human nature. I've learned to recognize true allies from fair-weather friends. Catherine, Jessica, Michael, and others who stood by me during Bradley's reign have proven themselves not just as loyal employees, but as people of character and conviction. I've discovered that patience can be more powerful than immediate action, that sometimes allowing others to reveal their true nature is more effective than confronting them prematurely. My father understood this when he arranged my inheritance the way he did, giving Bradley enough rope to eventually hang himself. Perhaps most importantly, I've learned that standing your ground doesn't require sacrificing your principles. When Bradley and Diana attempted to pressure me into selling my shares after their removal, offering substantial financial incentives, I refused. Some things aren't for sale: my father's legacy, the livelihood of hundreds of employees who depend on Reynolds Innovations, and my own integrity. Looking forward, I've established a scholarship and mentorship program for young women pursuing business careers. Named after my mother, the Margaret Reynolds Business Leadership Initiative provides financial support and professional guidance to women who might otherwise lack access to such opportunities. It's my way of addressing the gender barriers I encountered in my own journey, hopefully making the path a little smoother for those who follow. The company continues to evolve under my leadership. We've expanded internationally, opening offices in Singapore and Munich. Our product line has diversified while maintaining the quality standards my father insisted upon. Most exciting is our new sustainability initiative, which aims to make Reynolds Innovations carbon neutral within 5 years, a goal my father would have enthusiastically supported. As I look back on this transformative year, I'm reminded of something my father often said. Sometimes being underestimated is your greatest advantage. It gives you the element of surprise. Bradley and Diana certainly underestimated me, never imagining the quiet, accommodating stepdaughter would ultimately outmaneuver them. But the real victory isn't in proving them wrong, it's in proving my father right, in demonstrating that his faith in me was justified. Reynolds Innovations continues, not just as a tribute to his vision, but as a living, evolving entity that honors his values while embracing new possibilities. That, I believe, is the truest form of legacy. Have you ever been in a situation where someone underestimated you only for you to prove them wrong in the end? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more experiences like this one. Thank you for listening to my journey from being excluded to taking my rightful place. Remember, sometimes the person they least expect is exactly the one they should fear the most.